All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the. I'm sorry, let me just pause this audio from here. Welcome to the sixth edition of the Grandstream Tech Talk. This is Abdel Jabbar. I am a support engineer with Grandstream Networks. Thank you again for taking the time to join me today in this webinar, in which we are going to cover the 4 top popular subjects for this quarter. Okay, so for those who don't know, so every quarter we send a survey to our customers to choose a topic or group of topics that you would like us to cover in Grandstream Tech Talk. So based on the last survey we did, these are the top 4 chosen topics. So first of all, we're going to talk about the LDAP service built into the Grandstream UCM. Then we're going to also go through the LDAP configuration on the IP phone. We're going to talk about the UCM 6300 Remote Connect setup. Then we're going to have an overview of the WebRTC application. And then we're going to go through a few mechanisms built into the Grandstream UCM and the IP phones for failover implementation. Then we're going to have some time towards the end to go through your questions and answer them. So just a little housekeeping before we get started. This session will be recorded and published later on the Grandstream YouTube channel. And the copy of the presentation will also be available on the Grandstream website, so you can download it. As you might know, there is a Q&A button under, I think, at the right bottom of your screen. Please use that one to submit your questions regarding today's presentation. And there is group chat. You can use group chat for general discussion. All right, so let's get started. So the first topic for today is LDAP, which stands for Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. And LDAP is a client-server protocol used to access and manage directory information over the IP network. And LDAP allows clients to search and look up directories for specific information about data entries. And the LDAP directory is organized in a hierarchical tree-like structure, which usually reflects the organizational boundaries. And at the top of the directory tree is the root, and it's always it always includes the DC, which stands for domain component, and which usually represents the domain of the organization or the company. Then under the domain component, we have the organizational units, which could be used to represent a department within the same company, or it could be geographical locations when you have multiple branches under the same company. And the OU is what includes the entries for people, files, and shared resources. And the common use of LDAP in Voip, which is going to be the focus of today's presentation, is to provide a central database for contact information. And entries in the directory information tree are identified using the DN, or distinguished name, and it uses the format displayed here. So you have CN, which stands for common name. So for example, if you're looking for Dexter, that's the format that the phone is going to use to request information, contact information about Dexter. And the information is also stored on the server using the same format. And there are several benefits to using LDAP instead of local phone book on the IP phones. And LDAP allows you to use multiple independent directories. As you can see in the image, we have one directory for sales, then we have another directory for finance. And you can assign like specific directory, as I mentioned, to a specific group of users. It could be like also a specific directory to a specific location. And it also provides an easy to manage central database for contact information compared to local phone books where you have to go to each single phone and update its local phone book. And it is more secure because the directory information is not stored on the phone itself. It is stored on the UCM, and the UCM basically just sends every time it needs information about specific user or specific person, it's going to send a query to the UCM on LDAP server to provide it with that information regarding that user. And also because if the physical phone got stolen or lost, the directory information will not be jeopardized. Okay, because it's not stored again on the IP phones. Plus, it is an open standard that can work with devices from different vendors. You can use the Grandstream IP phones with any open standard LDAP server, and you can also use the UCM with other third-party IP phones. So for the LDAP service that is built into the UCM has an LDAP server that provides some information that users can search and look up using their IP phones. And the structure of the LDAP service on the UCM is similar to the standard one. You have the main domain component, and then you can create multiple organizational units, or where each organizational unit will have its own directory and its own phone book. So in this example, in the image, we have 3 phone book directories, one for sales, support, and finance. So when you go to the UCM and you create like 3 separate directories, the users in finance will not be able to access directory information in the support directory. And the same thing applies to salespeople. They can't access directory information or contact information in the directory of the finance phone book on the UCM. So this allows you to create like independent phone books on the UCM. The UCM supports both LDAP and secure LDAP, and we're going to go through that in a moment to show you how you can configure the LDAP service on the UCM. So let me get the web interface here. All right. So let me log into my UCM. So I'm going to use 6200 for that. So the LDAP service is available under System Settings, LDAP Server. So this is the information regarding the LDAP service of the UCM. So the domain component, the default one, we use PBX. You can change that one, by the way. If, for example, if you don't want to use PBX, you can use Grandstream, or you can use the name of your company. And then the default OU is also PBX. You can change that one as well. The CN is admin. Then you have the password. The password is used for managing the directory. And then here at the bottom, we have the certificates for the LDAP service, because as I mentioned, the UCM supports both LDAP and secure LDAP. The UCM comes with the built-in certificates, so it's okay to use those in case you want to customize it to use your own. You just need to get the cert file, the key, and the certification authority certificate. And you can just simply upload them to the UCM so that the UCM can use that information. So if we go to the LDAP service management, it's under LDAP phone book. And usually by default, you only have one, which is this one. I already created that one, so that one was added manually. And the default one under the PBX domain component, so every time you create an extension on the UCM, that extension will be added automatically to that directory. So here I have 74 extensions. And the thing about the default directory is that you can't delete or you can't add entries to it, because as I mentioned, it's tied to the extensions that you create on the UCM. So in case you would like to remove some entries, let's say, let me go back here. So here you will notice we have 74 entries, by the way. So if I go back here to extensions, so let's say you have these two users with extension 1000, 1001. You don't want to share the contact information of these two users through LDAP. You simply select the extension and then you go to edit. Oh, well, I can try the basic way. Just go here. And then if we go under features, all the way at the bottom, there's the enable LDAP. So this option is checked by default, or it's enabled by default. So every time you add an extension, it will be added to the LDAP phone directory. So if I uncheck this one, save and apply, then that extension will not be added to the default LDAP phone book. Some users, sometimes some implementations, they like to remove some extensions. They don't want to share them through the LDAP. So the process is very simple. You just go to the extension and the features, and then you uncheck the enable LDAP. So if I go back here to LDAP server, we will see that the number went down to 73. And if we're looking for extension 1002, it's not there together with extension 1001. The other option also with the LDAP phone books is that you can add mini LDAP phone books. You can just simply click on LDAP, then you can assign it a name. If this is, for example, for sales, you can just save and apply. Then you can start adding information to it. You can add it manually just by entering the account number, the email, the caller ID number, and that information. Or in case you have a large number of users that you would like to add, you can use the import option. And the import option uses three formats: CSV, VCF, and the XML. The easy way to do it so you can get the templates, you can go to the default one, okay, and then export that file as a CSV file. So let me save that one. Okay, and then you go to, you open the file and then you edit that information, okay? So let me remove all that stuff here. Okay, so when you do that, it gives you a template that you can use to build other phone book templates. For example, if you want to add first name, let's say Jason Matt, account number. Account number, by the way, is required. And in case you want to add, let's say, phone book with external numbers, which doesn't include the account number, you can include like dummy numbers. And I'm going to show you later on the phones how you can tell the phone not to display these numbers. So we're just going to use random information here. Okay, the email, we don't need that information. Like for the phone number, we can add information like this. So if we save and apply that info, oh yeah, we need to specify the DN, so we have cells. Just one thing, be careful with the with how you write the name, because the LDAP with the XML LDAP is case sensitive. So if you write cells with capital S and you want to import it to the UCM is going to create another OU with cells using capital letter S. So we just want to add it to the cells OU that already exists here. So we're going to use all lowercase. Save and apply that information. And if we go to import, we can import back the same file. So it's in there somewhere, download right here. Okay, and then we see that the entry was added to the phone book. And if we come here, it shows the account number and the caller ID name. I can always go back here and change the information related to that entry in the LDAP phone book. So here I have two phone books, And then I can assign, when I go to the IP phones, then I can choose which phone book to assign to the IP phone. You can do that manually. In other words, you can go to the phone and then you can enter the filters and the attributes. But we're going to do it from zero config because it's going to make it easier for us. So if I go to zero config, I have a GRP 2615, okay. So if I go under settings, advanced settings, modify, say yes, okay, yes. So we're looking for the contact configuration. Minimize that one too. So here under the contact list, you have the directory. So this is for the LDAP information. So when using the UCM as the LDAP server, it gets very easy. All you have to do is select the one of those phone directories. So we created sales, GS, I already created that one, and then we have the default one. So let's say we want to assign it to the GS phone book. You just select that one. Then the UCM will provision the IP phone with all those parameters. So you don't have to go and copy and paste. In case you are using a third-party LDAP server, well, that's where you need to enter that information manually. But since we are using the Grandstream UCM as the LDAP service, so I'm going to select the phone book that I would like to assign to this phone, save, and then send the notification to the phone, then apply the changes. So if I go back here to the IP phone, okay, the phone is doing some provisioning. All right. So if I go to LDAP settings, you will see that the UCM will provision the phone with all these attributes, filters, and display information on the settings. So you don't have to make any changes. In case you wonder what filters or what attributes the UCM supports, let me go back here one more time. Let's go to LDAP setting. So for the attributes that are supported by the UCM, these are the only ones that are supported. There's account number, caller ID name, email, first name, last name, department, mobile number, home number, and fax number. If you are using the IP phone with a third-party LDAP service, you might need to change that information based on what attributes they use. These are standard attributes, but sometimes, for example, the UCM, if we look right here, and let me write it down here. So for example, if I want the IP phone to query both the mobile phone, the mobile number, and the account number, I can include both of them right here separated by empty space. So for example, the UCM uses mobile number. If you are using third-party LDAP server, they might use a different attribute. Some of them they use, for example, telephone number instead of mobile number. So you need to make sure what attributes they use before you configure them on the IP phone. So earlier I mentioned that the account number on the IP, when you create a phone book on the UCM is mandatory. You have to enter that information. In case you don't want to query that information, I can remove the account number. Excuse me. Okay, I can remove that information so that the phone will only query the caller ID name and the mobile number. But one thing that I have to, another change that I need to add is right here too, because that's the filter. That's what the phone is going to use in the request for the number. So instead of requesting the caller, the account number, I want the IP phone to request the mobile number. So I have to change that one as well. And then the LDAP display name. So this is what the phone is going to display on the LCD screen. Then I can change that one as well to mobile number. So when the phone is going to request this information, and it's going to use this as a filter, and then when it receives that information, it will display it as a mobile number and caller ID name. So that's how in case you want to add like a phone book with external numbers on the UCM and you want to configure the phones to query only the external numbers for a specific directory. You can use both if you need to. So let's say you want to have both like mobile number and account number. I can just add it like that. Okay, and in the display, I can add it as well. So that when the phone, because the display is what the phone displays on the phone. If you request mobile number, account number, and caller ID number, and caller ID name, I'm sorry, and you don't uh, select it here under the LDAP display. So even if the phone receives a response about that filter or attribute, it's not going to display it. So this one dictates what the phone is going to display on the LCD screen. And one more thing to add here, because we are requesting both account number and mobile number, so we need to add two filters here. This has a different syntax. So the way you add two, you just add a pipe and then parentheses, then you add another parentheses at the end. So here we are looking for account number. Okay, so we have two. All right. So just remember to add this pipe right here at the beginning, then save and apply those changes. Then you have this option right here. You can enable LDAP lookup for incoming call or outgoing calls as well. By default, the UCM uses version 3, so you don't need to change that one. If you have a legacy LDAP server that still uses version 2, you just want to check that one, set it to version 2. So we're going to keep that one to version 3. So as you can see here, I didn't configure the username and I didn't configure the password because the UCM supports anonymous requests for read-only entries on the LDAP directory. If you are using an LDAP server that requires authentication, then you need to enter the username and the password right here. Then save and apply. If you want to use LDAP Secure, you can just set that one to LDAP S. All right, then save and apply. Another benefit also of using the LDAP service on the UCM is the option to generate phone books for users. So you can create your own list, like own directory on the LDAP server instead of provisioning or providing that as client server LDAP for the IP phones. You can come here. Let me show you something. Okay, so let me minimize those. Okay, so in case you don't want to use LDAP, but you want to use the phone, the local phone book on the phones, you can use this option right here, phone book XML server. So the UCM is going to work as the phone book server for your IP phones. This is provisioning. In other words, if you select the, let me go back here, LDAP directory. So we're interested in the LDAP directory. So when you choose that option, the UCM is going to use the directory in the under the LDAP server and generate an XML phone book that the phones can request from the UCM for provisioning. So if I select GS and then I save and apply, the UCM is going to provision that IP phone with all the directory entries in that phone book directory. So let's save and apply those changes. Let's update. Okay, so if we go to system settings, just to check what entries do we have under the GS. So we have Thomas. Okay, so if we go to the IP phone, let's see if it got provisioned. Okay, so you see that it's got provisioned with the LDAP directory that is on the IP phone. So that's also one of the nice ways, instead of going like and using tools to convert XML files to, I'm sorry, to convert CSV files to XML and then provision them to the IP phones, you can simply go to zero config and use the same LDAP phone book directory and tell the UCM to generate an XML phone book, and then the UCM will provision it to the IP phone. So the information here will be stored on the IP phone itself. All right. Let me see if you guys have any questions about LDAP. Yeah, so someone is asking how to access different phone books in the same LDAP directory. Again, let me bring back here this presentation. So LDAP uses this structure, okay? Uh, like users right here under the sales OU, they can only access directory information in that OU. If you want to allow, for example, Dexter to access both uh, directory entries in sales OU and finance OU, then you need to create another OU, which includes both entries in both, all entries in both directories. All right. So the second topic for today is the UCM Remote Connect, which is offered through the Grandstream Cloud Platform GDMS and the new UCM 6300 series. So UCM Remote Connect service is designed to offer users a quick setup for working remotely using the Grandstream WebRTC application, Voip, which I'm going to show you in a few moments, and also the mobile app Grandstream Wave that runs on both Android and iOS devices to communicate and join meetings. You can also configure SIP endpoint like IP phones to remotely register to the UCM through GDMS Remote Connect, something that I will demonstrate shortly. And in addition, GDMS Remote Connect offers several features to remotely manage and maintain the UCM, including cloud storage for backup and task scheduling like upgrade and reboot and reset. It's a lot of options that we can go through as well. And the major benefit of using Remote Connect is the automated NAT traversal that allows users to seamlessly communicate remotely from external networks without the need to create rules on the firewall. So as you can see in this slide with Remote Connect, all the traffic goes through GDMS, and GDMS creates a secure connection with the UCM to relay the traffic uh, uh, through that secure connection. And usually with devices located behind nets to be able to connect remotely with an IP PBX, there's lots of configuration that needs to be done on the firewall to allow hosts to communicate directly. And sometimes this process can become complicated, and especially when you have uh, remote users that are trying to connect to the IP PBX. So with the net firewall traversal mechanisms offered by Remote Connect, there is no need to go through the hassle of creating firewall rules, because the Remote Connect uses a combination of communication standards to bypass the firewall. And the three communication standards that we need to learn about are STUN, which stands for Session Traversal Utilities for NET, and then there is TURN, which stands for Traversal Using Relay Around NET, and then we have ICE, which stands for Interactive Connectivity Establishment. So first, let's look at how STUN service works. Some of you might already be familiar with STUN, or Session Traversal Utilities for NET, which is usually configured on the IP phones to learn about their public IP address. when it's located behind NAT and it's trying to register to a remote IP PBX. And we often configure stun on the IP phones when we have issues related to audio on remote devices. And basically, IP phones use the learned public IP address to communicate with the remote SIP server, and it sends the learned information as a part of the SIP message. And GDMS already provides that service, and when you add the UCM 6300 to your GDMS account, and GDMS will automatically provision the UCM with the GDMS stun service URL. So this is an example just of how, if we look at the image, it explains how that works. So using either WebRTC or an IP phone or the UCM itself, the endpoint devices, they send a binding request to the stun server. It's like asking, hey, what is my public IP address? Because when devices are located behind NATs, there's no way for them to know what is the public IP address in which they are sitting behind. And one of these mechanisms that allows them to do that is stun. So the IP phone sends a binding request to the stun server asking about its public IP address. Then the stun server responds back with the detected public IP address where the phone is located. And then the IP phone or the endpoint device will use that information in its SIP message to send it to the SIP server or the IP PBX. So, however, in certain networks, and especially when you have a router that does symmetric NATing, like changing the IP address and the local port number, stun itself will not solve the connection issue. So you might still experience issues even if you enable stun on the endpoint device. And this is when the media endpoints need to connect through a server that implements turn. And turn stands for traversal using relay around NAT, which is an extension to stun that allows media traversal. So as you can see in the image right here, GDMS acts as a relay server to the IP phones and the UCM. So it takes signaling and media traffic from an endpoint and forwards it to the UCM, and then from the UCM back to the endpoint. So the same thing applies to turn. When you enable Remote Connect on the UCM, GDMS would automatically provision the UCM with the turn service URL to use. So this is not something that you need to configure on the UCM. It's done basically automatically. And the third standard that is involved in this process is ICE, which stands for Interactive Connectivity Establishment. These three standards are widely used in WebRTC applications. Without these standards, WebRTC applications will not work. So for ICE, it's a framework that enhances the work of both stun and turn to provide reliable connection to relay the media. And the way ICE works, it sends multiple requests to the stun server using multiple pairs of IP address and port numbers. And it builds a list of these as candidates that are basically communicated in the stun binding responses. And from that list, ICE decides which pair of IP address and port number to use based on which one is more reliable. All right, so let's go back here to the UCM. All right, save and apply. So to add devices, a UCM 6300 to your GDMS account, the process is very simple. You go to UCM device. As you can see, I already have one here, but to add another one, you can go to add device and you just assign it a name. For example, this is the Office UCM. Sorry. There are two things that are required to add UCM to GDMS. You need the MAC address and the initial password. The initial password is included in the sticker in the back of the UCM, and each UCM has a unique MAC address and a unique password. Then you decide which site you want to add it to. Okay, so I've already done this process. So once you click save, the UCM will add it automatically. And when it adds it to GDMS, this is what happens. If you go to the UCM, so this is the UCM that I just added. If you go to UCM Remote Connect and the value added features, GDMS will create a URL for the UCM that remote users can use. And it also creates the port number for TLS. Because one thing about Remote Connect is that it works only with TLS. And I'm going to show you this when we go to the IP phone configuration to register to the UCM. And then here it supplies the UCM with the Sun server to use. So this is something that you don't need to configure on the UCM. All those parameters are provisioned automatically. And it allows you to have 5 gigabytes of cloud storage on your GDMS. And the cloud storage is used for CDR and also for backup. And I'm going to show you later how to back up your UCM on GDMS. Then it shows you the subscription plan that you have. Currently, our Remote Connect is still in beta. And I think in June or July, Grandstream will release the new plans for Remote Connect, so you can upgrade it to the plan that you would like to add to your UCM. So for the plan settings, we have these options right here. The 3 of them are enabled by default. So the first one is SIP extension sync. So every time you add an extension on the UCM, that information will sync automatically with your GDMS account. Because if you go here, let me go back to GDMS for a second. So after I added this UCM, if we go under SIP account, you will see that the extensions that are created on the UCM were synced automatically with my GDMS account. So every time you see this orange icon with UCM, that means that's an extension or user ID that was synced from the UCM. Let's go back here again. Just always make sure this option is checked. Okay, because if you uncheck this option, turn is not going to work. You can also Cdr Stored in GDMS in case you want to do that, or if you have that one unchecked, the Cdr will also will be stored using the internal storage of the UCM. There's also the option where you can sync the alert events from the UCM. And the alert events that we are talking about are right here. So I will come back here to Remote Connect again. So the alert events are system events. Okay, so when you check an option here, let's say disk usage. So every time there's an event that is triggered from this list, for example, here I have a couple of them, user login failed. So all the information, all these events will sync automatically with my GDMS account. So that's the purpose of this feature right here. Then you have the option to customize the logo. So as you can see right here, I have already customized mine. Just make sure you use the same resolution, like 64, 64, or 256. So you have 3 logos that you can upload. And here also it gives you some statistics about the activity on the UCM. So if we go back here to the UCM, okay, and the UCM backup, it shows you the backups that you have. And from here, you can restore the backup, you can download it, and you can also copy the URL for it in case you want to send it to somebody else. And let me go back here to the phone so I can show you how you take backups on GDMS. So if I go to backup and I want to take a new backup, it's going to give me 2 options. Do you want to use the local storage of the UCM, or you want to sync it with your GDMS account? So if I back this system, that backup will be stored in my GDMS account. Then I'm going to have another backup here. All right. Now let's look at the options that are available through the UCM options that are available through GDMS. So if you go here, so it gives you information about the device details, then edit device. If we click on edit device, so this is the link that GDMS automatically generates from my UCM. If I want to change that one, I can change it to a different name. I can, for example, put grandstream.com eGDMS. But the thing is that make sure that whatever value you add here or string you add here is unique, because if somebody is already using Grandstream, you're not going to be able to use it. Okay, so just make sure you use that one. There's also the option where you can customize your own link, and this works like a DNS resolver. So you create your domain name. So when you create that domain name, it needs to point back to that one as well. Okay, so you can use your own, but at the end, it's going to resolve to this domain name. Let's switch back to personal. So this is where you customize your URL, right? The other options here is authorization management. The purpose of this feature is available for both the UCM and the Voip devices. So when you are experiencing issues with the UCM or any Voip device, and you open a ticket with the Grandstream, we might ask you to check this option, which is called authorization management. And basically, when you click on it, this device will be added to the account of the GDMS admin, the Grandstream admin. So the admin will have it available so that they can access that device and do the necessary troubleshooting. So when you do that, GDMS is going to ask you for how long you want to allow the Grandstream GDMS admin to have access to this device. For example, if I put 3,600 minutes, if you calculate that one, it's going to give you the number of days that this device will be available to GDMS, to the Grandstream GDMS admin. All right, so the other interesting option here is the remote access to the PBX. So now if you deploy an IP PBX somewhere and you try to connect remotely to it, you need to go to the firewall and then create rules. So with the remote connect, you don't need that at all. So you just come here to your GDMS account and then you click on this option. Then it's going to create a link for the web interface of your UCM, so you can enter that information and log in. So this is also one of the interesting tools in GDMS, because you don't have to create firewalls and all that kind of configuration that is required to remotely access devices. And then from here, I can remotely access my UCM, but I already have that one here locally, so I'm just going to skip that one. All right, so now we talked about how to add UCM to Remote Connect and the features of the UCM. So let's say you want to register a remote IP phone to the UCM using Remote Connect. So let me pick account 3, and let's talk about the required settings to register remotely to the UCM. So the first thing that I need to do is go to UCM Remote Connect and copy this link. Okay, and also I need to copy this port, because it again, Remote Connect with SIP devices uses TLS. So I'm gonna remember this port 1821. So if I go to the IP phone and the SIP server, okay, then colon, then I'm gonna add 1821. All right, then here I'm gonna add the extension. Let's say I'm trying to register with extension 1009. And then the password, save, and apply the changes. Okay, so if we go back here, the account is registered. One more setting that you need to enable, which is disabled by default, is TLS TCP. By default, it's set to UDP, so you must check that one to TLS TCP for the IP phone to register to GDMS. The other option that you need to enable to avoid issues with audio is NAT traversal. You must set that one to stun. Okay, so I'm going to set that one to stun, save, and apply. Then I will come here to the UCM and copy the stun address, okay, and make sure the UCM is using the same. The phone will still work if you use a different stun server, but it's always recommended to use the same one that the UCM is using. So I just need, excuse me. So I just need to copy that information here, then save and apply. Usually when you save and apply, it's going to ask you to reboot the phone, okay? So that's why I already have that setting. By default, this setting, the stun server is empty, is blank, so you have to enter the stun server. So again, there are 4 steps. Make sure the stun server is configured. And next, make sure the network settings for NAT traversal is set to stun. And number 3, make sure that the SIP settings right here and the basic settings is set to TLS TCP. And the 4th one, make sure you use the same URL and the TLS port number. And that information can be copied from the UCM. The other thing, this link, you can use it to register remotely to the UCM, or you can use it also to access the WebRTC application of the UCM. So if I use that link, okay, let's say I'm trying to connect with extension 1003. So the username is going to be the extension number. The password is going to be the SIP password, which you need to get from here. So for example, I'm using this password. I'm just going to copy that one and paste it here. Okay. Then it's going to ask me to use to choose the microphone, also to enable the camera. So all the extensions that you create on the UCM will have this ability to log into to log into the WebRTC application using your browser. Let's say you have an extension. Let's say I have this extension 1001, and I don't want anyone to use the WebRTC application on this IP phone. If that is the case, I select the extension, then I go under Features, and I make sure to disable this option. Okay, if I disable WebRTC support for extension 1001, this extension will not be available for WebRTC application. In other words, if I come here and I use extension 1001, even if I have the correct SIP password, I will not be able to open the WebRTC application. So now that we are here, let's look at what we have available under this option. So the first one is chat. So chat now is supported on the Wave WebRTC application. So let's say you have another user connected. Yeah, let me try different one here. So let's say extension 1004 belongs to another user. I can use the chat room here and chat with that user, and that user will also log to his extension using the same process that I use with my extension 1003. You can also initiate a video call, audio call, or you can also share files, like transfer files from you to that user. There's also the contact list. So the UCM will sync the information in the LDAP directory as well as the extensions that are built into the UCM. Then you have calls here. This is a history, like the logs of all the calls that were made and received. Then you have the option of meeting, where you can schedule video meetings or audio meetings. There is one requirement though for this option to work. If I go back here to the UCM and the call features, you must create some office rooms, some conference rooms for audio and for video, so that when users connect using the WebRTC application, they will be able to schedule or meet now. Because if you click on schedule meeting, it's going to ask you to choose the conference room. So you must create one before on the UCM so that this option be available to users. Okay. The same thing applies to audio uh, conferencing. And here you have the keypad, which allows you to dial numbers. So if I try to dial the different number, I can initiate an audio call or a video call from here. And it's going to use the built-in camera and the microphone of my computer. There's also the option where you can download the client. So I'm using the web browser, but in case you want to use the clients, the application on your computer, you can also click on that one. Then you can download based on which operating system you have. There's the option to adjust your audio settings, webcam settings, and entrance card. This option is compatible with the Grandstream door system, GDS. There is a documentation on the Grandstream website that explains how to configure that, so you can always go back to the documentation and review it. The other options that you can use are the QR code, because as you know, Grandstream also has the WebRTC application that you can install on your iOS and Android device. And if you go to the Apple Store, for example, you're going to see that there is Wave Lite and Grandstream Wave. Wave Lite is a soft phone. So in case you want to use the WebRTC of the UCM, you need to use the Grandstream Wave. So you can just simply open the application and you scan the QR code and the information will be uploaded automatically to your application. So you can start making and receiving calls from that application. The account settings, so when you click here on the account setting, it takes you to the user portal on the UCM, okay? And the user portal of the UCM, this is where the users, they have access to their personal files, like configurations of the extension, CDR that is related to the extension, login settings in case they want to change the password to log in, personal data where they can access voicemail, recordings, where they can also have access to their fax files, or they can use also this one to send files using the web interface of the UCM. So the user portal provides you with a lot of options that you can use to apply a lot of things that only belongs to that specific user. All right, so next we're going to move to the third topic of today, which is going to be the failover mechanism that is built in the IP phones. So the IP phones, the Grandstream IP phones, yeah, let me see if I skipped, no. So that's the first one. So I will primarily focus on the two widely used mechanisms built in the Grandstream IP phones. So we have the SIP server redundancy using dual registration, and we're also going to talk about the DNS-based failover. And first we start with SIP server redundancy using dual registration on the IP phone. So all Grandstream IP phones support dual registration. You can configure the IP phone to register to both primary and secondary server. And basically the secondary server will be used as a backup in case the primary server goes offline. And in some platforms, they use a primary and secondary server for load sharing besides redundancy. For instance, if the primary server is loaded with more endpoints that it cannot handle the load, it will stop responding to new SIP registration attempts from new phones, which will push the endpoint devices to automatically switch to the secondary server. And the default behavior on the Grandstream IP phones is that they will attempt to register to the primary server 3 times. And if there is no response from the primary SIP server, the IP phones will automatically switch to the secondary server. And to allow the IP phones to detect when the primary server goes offline, it is always recommended that you reduce the registration expiration on the IP phones. And I'm going to show you how you can do that. And this will make the phone register more frequently and eventually check if the server is still online. Another failover technique that is widely implemented by Voip providers to improve the service availability is the use of DNS SRV record. So we all know that a DNS server is primarily used to resolve domain names to IP addresses. And it uses multiple DNS record types to provide information about a domain name or a host name. For example, the commonly used DNS-A record is used to resolve a host name with the corresponding IP address. And the DNS record that we are interested in today is the SRV record that is used to provide information about specific service by specifying host name and the port number to be used for the service. So in addition to specifying the port number for the service, DNS SRV record can also provide a list of host name addresses to be used for the same service, so that the endpoint device can use that list for failover. So the example in the image shows the IP phone sends a DNS query for the SRV record for the hostname example.com, and the DNS server responds with a list of 2 target hosts. And if we look at the information inside the DNS response, we will find some other information like priority, weight, and the port number for the service. Here it shows that the SIP server uses port 5090 for SIP. So the IP phone needs to use the destination UDP port 5090 to talk to the SIP server. But how does the IP phone know which server to prioritize? The SRV record defines the priority and weight for each target host. So the IP phone must read the values for the priority and the weight to decide, of course, which server to use first. So we have one server with a priority of 10, and then we have the other has a priority of 20. And the DNS standard dictates that the target host with the lower priority value should be prioritized. In other words, the lower the priority value, the higher the priority. So in this case, the target host sip1.example.com with priority 10 will be prioritized. So while sip2 .example.com will be used for backup in case sip1.example.com goes offline. And the weight is used as the tiebreaker when the target hosts have the same priority value. So in our case, both of them have different priority values. That's why the weight is not configured. But for the weight, the target host with the higher or highest value gets prioritized over the one with the lowest priority. Excuse me. I have a trace here. I would like to share that with you guys so you can see how that works. Let me bring it right here. Okay. So this is a trace, okay, for provider here in the US, Next Vortex, and I know that they use SRV, so that's why I provided that trace. So here you will see that the IP phone sends a DNS query using the SRV. It's like it's asking for the SRV. I'm going to show you how you can configure that on the IP phone so you can tell the IP phone to request SRV. A lot of carriers here in the United States and across the globe, they use SRV records, especially when they have multiple servers in different regions and locations. So I'm going to show you how you can configure the phone to request the SRV record. So here the phone requests the SRV record for the domain nextvortex.com. And then here we see the response for the request. And if we minimize these, you will see that the answer includes 4 servers here. It's like Next Vortex, they're using multiple servers. So in case one goes down, the phone is going to switch to the next one. So we have PX5, then we have PX11, PX15, and PX1. So as we mentioned earlier, the phone needs to decide which one to use first. So the first criteria that we need to look at is the priority. So the one with the lower value has the higher priority. So in this case, PX11 will be the first one that the phone is going to use, okay? And if you look at the DNS query for that domain, it's going to start with PX11, then 20, which is the second, PX15, then it's going to ask PS15, then PX1, and so on. And then when the phone receives the IP addresses that are associated with these domain names, it will try to register to this one first because that's the one that has the highest priority. So that's how SRV works on the Grandstream IP phones. So let me log into one of the IP phones here so I can show you where you can enable that one. So here I'm not using any domain name. Let's pick that one, the third one, okay? So let's say the provider or your SIP carrier said that they are using SRV and that you have to enable that one on the IP phone. To do that, you just select the account, you go under network settings, and then you go to DNS mode. By default, the phone uses a record, which is used to resolve a domain name to an IP address, okay? Some providers, when they use SRV, you can always come back here and then enable the SRV record, okay? So when you enable the SRV, the phone will send the same type of message that I showed you in the PCAP trace. Then you have the other option here, which is the NAPTR that works in conjunction with the SRV. And the DNS NAPTR record is a record that uses a regular expression to be applied to an existing string to produce a new domain label or new URL. And the IP phone will use the resulting URL for subsequent SIP requests. A lot of carriers, this is not very popular as SRV, but some providers might use it when they want to switch from an old domain to a new domain. So instead of changing the information, all the IP phones, they use the NAPTR so that the phones, they can point them to a different URL to use. Okay, so we said for SRV, we're just going to enable SRV. Then we have three options here. So the default one is when the IP phone receives multiple IP addresses, it's going to use the first one, okay, and store that information. The other option that here is saved one until DNS TTL. Let me bring that trace again one more time so we can look at something here. So when the phone resolves, the DNS, I'm sorry, resolves the domain name, it always provides TTL or time to leave. So to leave, yeah. So here we have 300 seconds. In other words, if we select this option, the phone will need to store that information for 5 minutes before it tries again. Okay. The second option is saved one until no response. So if you choose this option, when the phone does a DNS query and it receives those responses, it's going to save them and it's going to keep using the same one all the time without sending further DNS queries. And it's only going to send a DNS query when the primary server does not respond anymore. That's when it's going to send a DNS query or move to this to move to the second the second target host in the DNS response. That's what I mean. Then we have the third option here that was here. I didn't mention that one. The other option is use configured IP address. All right. Some servers, this is one case that I remember where we had to change that one. So when you use a domain name, so let's say you have a SIP provider that has multiple regions and multiple locations that are spread all across the map. In some cases, the DNS server may send you the host target for a different region that is probably far from where you are. So if that's the case, then you can specify here which IP addresses to use. So if you are using a domain name and they have this one that you know it's in your region, so that makes it close to you so that you don't have to, for the packets to travel long and then come back, you can specify the IP addresses that are associated with that domain name so that the phone will use this one as the primary. If this one goes down, it can go back to the backup IP address number one and backup IP address number two. So that's the purpose of use configured IP, then just save and apply the configuration. So during the presentation, I mentioned that with SRV, it's always recommended to reduce the registration timeout. By default, it's 60 minutes on the IP phones. You can reduce it, for example, to 3 minutes. Just when you enter this value here, make sure that your server or your provider doesn't restrict the registration timeout, because some of them, they might restrict it to 2 minutes or 4 minutes. So if you put 3 minutes here and the minimum that is allowed by the SIP server is 4 minutes, then you're going to experience some registration loss issues. So just make sure when you reduce it to coordinate with your provider so that you can use the registration expiration timeout that is allowed by your service provider. And the other option, available failover option we talked about earlier, is the use of dual registration. So let me choose this one. So let's say I have two servers, okay? This is usually implemented when you have a cluster of servers, and the servers, both of them, they replicate or they sync the information between them. In some implementations, they might use the two servers, but there's no replication going on between the two. They just do manual backup to the second server. It can work, but you might end up having some interruptions between that. But anyway, it's always the SIP provider that dictates what IP addresses to use and whether you can use dual registration or not. So when you enable primary SIP server and secondary SIP server, the phone will register to both of them and will subscribe to both servers. So in case you want the phone to register to both of them, but subscribe only to one for like BLF and voicemail, you can include that information in the BLF server. So when you enter the IP address here of the primary, the phone will always will always subscribe to the primary SIP server. Then save and apply. So these are the failover mechanisms built into the Grandstream GRP phones. For the UCM, as you know, there's the UCM 6500 that currently supports the HA100, the high availability device 100. The UCM 6300 will have a separate HA device that will be released sometime soon in the future, together with some built-in mechanisms that would allow you to use two UCM 6300 for failover. All right, so let's see if we have any questions regarding today's presentation. So I'm going to start with the Q&A section. So Pete Waters is asking, I now use GS Wave for remote users. Why do I need GDMS? That's a good question. Well, the short answer is that with if you are using Wavelight, you have to configure the firewall to open port 5060 or whatever port you are using for SIP. And when you do that, you basically open legitimate traffic as well as malicious traffic to reach to your UCM. So the benefit of using the Grandstream Wave, the WebRTC application on the computer or on the iOS and Android devices, is that you don't need to open ports on your firewall, and the experience is seamless. You can be anywhere, regardless where you are, that connection will be established. Another question, what does GDMS Grandstream service cost? Well, GDMS platform is free. You can go to gdms.cloud and sign up for a free account. It's free. You can add your own devices, as many devices as you want, and you can create as many organizations and as many sites as you want, and you can add as many devices as you want. The Remote Connect, instead, uh, this one for this server, let me go back here for a second. So this is the plan for Remote Connect, which is going to be released, as I mentioned earlier, sometimes in June or July. I'm not sure about the date. Elias is asking, can you send me the link for Tech Talk? Yes, Elias, we had an issue last time with the GTT5 with the recording. We are working on it right now, so you should see it available on the Grandstream YouTube channel within a couple of weeks, I would say. George is asking a question here about I have a third-party soft phone to my PC and it works fine. Yeah, it's going to work, as I mentioned, with SIP devices. It's going to work the same way I did with the IP phone. And when I configured the IP phone here, let me go back here. So when I configured it to register to the UCM through Remote Connect, you can apply basically the same thing to any SIP device to register to the UCM remotely through Remote Connect. Okay, let's see what other questions. So how to achieve zero config? I think we already talked about that, the provision directories through zero config. David is asking, can I connect an IP phone via Remote Connect to, yes, you can. Basically, that's what we did here. This is a GRP. You can do the same thing with the GXP 2170. Robert Bass is asking, we have GDMS and 6103, you mean 6301, set up for a customer with 2170 phones. Throughout the day, randomly the phones start blinking all red lights and completely in response. The only way is to, we need to troubleshoot that issue. I mean, I suggest you you open a ticket with us in the help desk so we can look into it, because we need to look at the packets and what happens exactly. Okay, let's see here. Robert Bays is asking, if a SIP trunk provider does not support TLS, can we still use GDMS for Pier SIP trunk connection that can connect to an external IP address of use? Oh yeah, I think you're talking about the, again, let me go back here. So the TLS is required for SIP endpoints that need to register to the UCM, okay? So it is not required for the SIP trunks here. Let me go back here. So if you need to register UCM to a SIP provider, it is not required. However, if you need to create a peer SIP trunk with another UCM and you want the traffic to go through GDMS, you can do that. Just make sure you select the trunk here and you set it to TLS, and you're going to use the same, let me go back here. Okay, so if you try to connect a peer connection between UCMs and you want to use the Remote Connect, you can do that using the URL of the UCM. Okay, save and apply the changes, and that's how you do it using the SIP peer trunk between two UCMs. Brad is asking, will GDMS monitor the call quality of UCM 6300 report outgoing incoming details, call quality information? There is an option here. Let me go back here to GDMS. So there is this option about statistics, and there is the call quality right here, which I think that's what you're asking for. Some features here will be available based on which plan you have, okay? But this option is available here. It gives you information about the average MOS, jitter, delay, and loss packet. It's not going to capture the real media, okay, but it's just going to provide you with metadata about the media. EDS is asking, is there an upgrade offer from 6200 to 300? No, I mean, the two devices use different hardware, so a software upgrade in this case is not going to work. All right, so I have a few more questions that I want to go through here. Peter is asking, DTMF volume is way too high when dialing number from the Windows. Yes, I believe there is a feature request for that one to add an option to reduce the volume. So we are already aware of that. Some people they made a comment about it. Corey is asking, can the GDMS be used for the GXW4500 gateways? Let me check right here. Nope. No, that's probably going to be something in the future. Yeah, it's the same question. If I want all the directories, how can we achieve via zero config? Again, I think I already answered that question. So if you have multiple OUs and you want one user to access all of them, you need to create another OU. So I don't see any more questions. I think this is it for today. Again, thanks everyone for taking the time to join me today in this webinar, and I hope you learned something. The recording will be posted or will be published on the Grandstream YouTube channel in a couple of days. Make sure you participate in the next survey so you can let us know about the topic that may be of an interest to you. Thanks everyone, and have a wonderful day.